They began racing cars in Victoria shortly after the start of the last century. The first automobile to arrive here was a 1902 Olds owned by a Dr. Hart. Mr. Todd's 1903 Stanley Steamer was the next, and along with his mechanic, they raced against the clock on the horse and wagon trail to points like the Malahat Summit, and made it in just 3 hours one way. In 1905, Mr. Butchart imported a bigger, more powerful 30-horsepower Winton, and the Willows horse racing track became a testing ground. Throughout 1919 and 1920, crowds of up to 4,000 people gathered at the Willows track to watch race cars from throughout the Pacific Northwest roar around that 1-mile oval. It would be another 13 years before the Langford Speedway opened and the Dave Cooper racing saga began. As a Saanich teenager during the 1930s, Dave bought a worn-out old Model T Ford for a couple of bucks and, after hours of tinkering, got it running. He inherited his gifts for mechanics from his father, and the interest in cars only increased once the Langford Speedway opened in 1937. He was often in the crowd of spectators. Dave was initiated into auto racing by Eric Foster, owner of the Fernwood Garage. After several years as a grease monkey and car jockey, he drove his first Langford race in 1941, starting in a $35 1936 street stock truck. He then hit the big time, racing in Stu Pringle's number 1 car. The track was closed during the war years, but it reopened in 1946 and the following year became Canada's only big car paved track. Driving Foster's $400 friction-proof special number 8, Cooper was suddenly a serious big car driver, finishing 4th best in the 1947 Island Sprint Car Championships. A plumber by trade, Dave soon became known as the Flying Plumber to sell out crowds of racing fans on the Northwest Circuit. Dave advertised his business with this sign on the track fence coming out of that famous south turn. It was an expensive location for a sign because it had to be repainted each time a driver failed to make that turn. Dave won his share racing against such veterans as Digger Caldwell, Bung Eng, Dale Fanning, and Jerry Van Trites, but the old track was closed in 1950. Racing at Up Island dirt tracks and at West Coast tracks so far away as California, Dave Cooper had his finest victory in the Portland Trophy Dash. And his worst spill, a 3-car end-over-end at Roseburg, Oregon. Back here at home, Dave was also involved in the construction of the new Western Speedway. When it opened in 1953, he was partnered with Bill Walters and Spin Sheridan, the first winners of both the Big Car and the new Stock Car Championships points. Dave had become increasingly fond of the ugly patched-up stock cars, and in 1951, he raced his last season of driving the fast, dangerous, and expensive Indy-style cars. He retained the Stock Car Points Championship, held the track record, and was voted most popular driver in 1954. The following year, he won the Gold Cup race and his 3rd Stocks Championship title. By 1957, Dave was virtually unbeatable, winning 5 major events plus his 4th championship title. In 1958, he made it 5 championships and more than 200 victories in 6 seasons. After winning his 6th championship in 1959, Dave, who'd become fascinated by sports cars, shifted to motorsports car racing. He began competing in the Victoria Motor Sports Car Club's rallies and hill climbs. In 1962, driving an Austin Healey 3000 in the Cross Canada Rally with Bob Lowe, road rebuilding in the Douglas Lake area cost them 4 hours and any hope of a good finish, but the next year they placed 2nd. Cooper was also a 4-time winner of the Owl Rally. Back at the track, Dave moved up to the Super Stock Racing, where he also proved quite competitive. Before retiring from active competition in 1974, he raced the 1972 Winston West 500 at Riverside, California, the track where we lost Billy Foster in 1967 and where Gary Kershaw won the Permitex 200 in 1971. To celebrate his more than 3,000 races, in 1962 they held a Dave Cooper Night at Western Speedway, where they made him honorary member of VITRA. Dave insisted that night that most of the credit was due to Bill Walters and Spin Sheridan, who molded the stock cars that Cooper drove to victories. In 1978, they held an old drivers reunion night at Western, and to Dave's surprise, some of the track crowd had found and restored his old number 66. Nearing the same age as his car number, Dave came out of the crowd, hopped in, and drove it to victory. Dave was one of the first inductees into the Victoria Auto Racing Hall of Fame when they honored his 3 decades of car racing in 1984. Now we widen this honor by sharing his exploits and victories with fans of all sports as we induct into the Greater Victoria Sports Hall of Fame, Dave Cooper.